Please, Sergeant at Arms, please start your recordings. Computer on cloud recording.
PC recording has started.
Backup recording is on.
Thank you. Sergeant Biondo, you may begin with your opening statement.
Good morning, all, and welcome to today's remote New York City Council hearing on the Committees of Fire and Emergency Management jointly with Technology. At this time, would all panelists please turn on their video? Once again, all panelists, please turn on your videos. To minimize disruptions, we ask everyone to please place electronic devices on vibrate or silent mode. If you wish to submit testimony, you may do so at testimony@council.nyc.gov. Again, that is testimony@council.nyc.gov. Thank you for your cooperation. Chairs, we are ready to begin.
Sorry if that was loud. The notes say make sure it's audible, so I did. Thanks for joining this virtual hearing for today's Committee on Fire and Emergency Management and Technology. Today, the committees will be examining the city's 911 and 311 responses during last month's tropical storm Isaias. Additionally, the Committee on Technology will be hearing introduction number 1755, sponsored by my friend and colleague, Chair Holden. I want to point out all the council members who have so far joined, including Chair Holden. That would be Council Members Koo, Council Members Maisel, Cabrera, Council Member Vallone, Brannan, Yeager. And I believe that's it. Please forgive me if I've missed anyone. The council will tell me. Emergency services, including those provided by the NYPD and EMS, are amongst the most critical services provided by the city. On a daily basis, New Yorkers rely on connecting to emergency dispatchers when faced with a medical emergency, a fire, or a public safety threat. These oftentimes life or death situations can be impacted by a few minutes or even seconds of delay in the response. Unfortunately, on August 4th, the city was being thrashed by Tropical Storm Isaias, and hundreds of thousands of New Yorkers were without power. Calls to our 911 system went unanswered. Although the administration has conceded that there were temporary delays in answering emergency calls, there has been no public explanation for the cause of these delays, no clarity on the scope of these issues or impact on the public, and no assurances, most importantly, from the administration that they are working to address this issue. At this hearing today, we hope to receive a full picture of the happenings during Tropical Storm Isaias and what the city is doing to ensure that never again happens in a time of crisis. I would now like to turn it over to Chair Holden, the chair of the Committee on Technology, to give his opening statement.
Thank you, Councilman Borelli, and good morning. I am Councilmember Robert Holden, chair of the Committee on Technology. I would like to welcome you all to our hearing. I am pleased to join the Committee on Fire and Emergency Management, chaired by my good friend, Councilmember Joe Borelli of the great borough of Staten Island. Today, we'll be focusing on the challenges faced by New York City's 311 and 911 systems during Tropical Storm Isaias. I will look to gain a better understanding of how these systems can be improved upon for the future. We will also be hearing Intro 1755 regarding an assessment of the 311 service request intake map. Intro 1755, of which I'm the sponsor, would require the Department of Informational Technology and Telecommunications to conduct an assessment of the interactive map accessible through the 311 website or mobile device applications that is used for the intake of 311 service requests and complaints. In order to determine the feasibility of improving the location accuracy of the 311 intake map, the department would also require to submit a report of the results of the assessment to the council. The 311 and 911 systems of New York City are the largest in the country, fielding the highest call volume per year, as well as servicing the most people. However, Tropical Storm Isaias has made it clear that our calls system still have a long way to go to sufficiently serve our communities when we need them most. During the storm, many New Yorkers trying to call 911 were met with an answering service and were unable to reach a live operator. Unfortunately, this was not the first time that this happened this year. The 911 system's lack of capacity to handle high call volume was also highlighted during the height of the coronavirus pandemic, as the fire department of New York had to put calls on hold because of the high call volume. Additionally, many New Yorkers spent hours reporting the damage wrought by Tropical Storm Isaias to 311, as 311 received thousands of calls during the height of the storm. But many have found the reporting and responsiveness capabilities of 311 to be inadequate. One family in Queens, for instance, had to wait an entire week for a fallen tree to be removed from their home, and repeated calls to 311, the fire department, the parks department, yielded no results. Crucially, this family was not able to report the severity of the situation, as their service requests did not have the ability to show that the tree had come through their roof. So our 911 and 311 systems are critical to the safety and well-being of our city's residents, and it is important to make sure that these systems are always ready and up to task. We look forward to better understanding the challenges that we're facing in 311 and 911 systems during Tropical Storm Isaias, as well as understanding how the city can better serve its residents with its 311 and 911 systems. We wish to work together with the administration on this important issue. We look forward to hearing the valuable testimonies from the administration, experts, community advocates, and alike. And this testimony will provide crucial insight on the problems that currently exist and will provide important groundwork for future solutions. I'd like to also thank our technology committee, Irene Bahovsky and Charles Kim, and the Fire and Management Committee staff, Joshua Kingsley, William Hagash, for their hard work in preparing for this hearing. I will now turn it back to my co-chair, Councilmember Borelli.
Thank you, the right honorable person from Queens. I just want to actually turn it to Committee Counsel Josh Kingsley to go over the procedural items that must be said before we hear from the administration.
Thanks so much, Chair Borelli. Good morning, everyone. I'm Josh Kingsley, Counsel to the Fire and Emergency Management Committee. Before we begin testimony, I want to remind everyone that you will be on mute until you're called to testify, after which you will be unmuted by the host. I will be calling on panelists to testify. Please listen for your name to be called. I will be periodically announcing who is the next panelist. The first panelist will be giving testimony from representatives of the New York City Police Department and the New York City Department of Information Technology and Telecommunications. For the NYPD, testimony will be provided by Deputy Chief Richard Napolitano. For DoIT, testimony will be provided by Commissioner Jessica Tisch. Additionally, the following representatives will be available for answering questions: from the Fire Department, Deputy Commissioner John Paul Aguirre, and from NYPD, Managing Attorney of Legislative Affairs, Michael Clark, and for DoIT, the Director of 311, Joe Morris Rowe. I will call on you when it's your turn to speak. During the hearing, if council members would like to ask any questions of the administration or specific panelists, please use the Zoom raise hand function, and I will call you in that order. All hearing participants should submit written testimony to testimony@council.nyc.gov. We will now call representatives of the administration to testify. Before we begin, I will administer the oath. Commissioner Tisch, Deputy Chief Napolitano, Deputy Commissioner Aguirre, Mr. Clark, and Mr. Morris Rowe. I will call on each of you individually for a response. Please raise your right hand and affirm the following oath. Do you affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth before these committees, and to respond honestly to council member questions?
I do.
I'll begin with Commissioner Tisch.
I do.
Deputy Commissioner Napolitano.
I do.
Deputy Commissioner Aguirre.
I do.
Mr. Clark.
I do.
And Mr. Morris Rowe.
I do.
Thank you, everyone, and you can begin when you are ready.
Good morning, Chairs Holden and Borelli, and members of the Committees on Technology and Fire and Emergency Management. My name is Jessica Tisch, and I am the Commissioner of the New York City Department of Information Technology and Telecommunications, DOIT, and the Citywide Chief Information Officer. As Commissioner of DOIT, I oversee the largest municipal IT organization in the country. In this role, I am responsible for many of the city's critical systems, chief among them 911 and 311. Additionally, at the height of the pandemic, Mayor de Blasio tasked me with overseeing and turning around 311 operations, which was both an honor and a privilege for two main reasons. Because 311 is an absolute gem, the connective tissue between New Yorkers and nearly every local government service, and the centralized depot for information about city programs. And because optimizing call center operations happens to be a passion of mine, which I came to somewhat late in life in my former job as Deputy Commissioner at the NYPD, overseeing 911 operations. The thing I miss most about that job is working with the city's police communications technicians, who literally serve as a lifeline for New Yorkers in need. With that context, I want to thank you for the opportunity to discuss the 311 call center response to Isaias, as well as the performance from a technology perspective of the 911 system during the tropical storm. My colleagues from the NYPD will address 911 operations on the day of the storm. Let's hit the 911 system from a technology perspective first. I can say categorically that there was absolutely no outage of the 911 system during the tropical storm. The technology performed as designed with no bugs, disruptions, or errors. However, persistent problems with the carriers continue to undermine overall service in New York City, and this is exacerbated during major weather events. In particular, I expect that some New Yorkers had difficulty connecting to the 911 system because the storm knocked out power to telecom carrier infrastructure, including cell phone towers, meaning some mobile phones lost service or had degraded or unstable service, depending on location and service provider. And in the case of home phones or landlines, we heard that certain carriers' trunks got overwhelmed as a result of volume. To be clear, these issues would have affected all of the customers' calls, not just calls to 911. The telecom carriers must harden their infrastructure. Sandy should have taught them that. It's been 8 years. And I am not telling you anything today that I haven't already told the leaders of each of the major carriers themselves. Finally, as Chief Napolitano will tell you in greater detail, at the height of the storm, 911 call volume was incredibly high. And in particular, for a sustained period of time, there were more calls than there were call takers to answer them simultaneously. But the 911 system was built to handle exactly this type of situation by queuing calls. When all the call takers were busy, 911 callers got queued up and connected to the next available police communications technician in order. Now let me move on to 311. I think the best way to understand the 311 response to the storm is in the context of the changes we put in place for COVID. During COVID, the role of 311 changed in an important way. Much like 911, 311 became a lifeline of sorts for New Yorkers. The number to call when you needed to be connected to a physician, a meal, assistance with unemployment, help applying for small business loans. The list goes on and on. In essence, so much more than what you traditionally think to call 311 for. So how did we bring down wait times, which had spiked to almost an hour at the end of March based on increased volumes, to virtually zero by mid-April? Well, we did it by adding hundreds of additional temporary call takers, including NYPD cadets, building out several new 311 call centers to accommodate the additional staff, taking a data-driven approach to optimizing call center operations, and creating express lanes for certain types of calls. So when it became clear the tropical storm Isaias might be making its way to New York City, we turned to this very playbook. First, we surged our staffing to 900 call takers on the day of the storm. This was the largest number of call takers 311 has ever had in a single day. Second, during the height of the storm, we had 600 call takers simultaneously taking calls, the largest number of concurrent call takers ever answering the phones at 311 by a factor of 5 pre-COVID. Third, we ensured our telephone system had enough capacity to accommodate the simultaneous call load and transfers. Fourth, we created an express lane for callers calling about tropical storm-related issues so that these callers wouldn't have to wait in queue behind people calling, for example, about property tax questions. And fifth, we added a voice recording upfront with contact information for Con Ed and PSE&G so that New Yorkers calling about power outages wouldn't have to wait on the line to get connected to the electric companies. In our planning, 311 pulled out all of the stops and then some to make sure the 311 call center was as prepared as it could be to meet New Yorkers' needs. And to be clear, all of these preparations were made 36 hours in advance. In the end, the volume was enormous, driven by tree and branch-related service requests, as well as calls about power outages. For context, on the first Tuesday in August last year, 311 received approximately 38,000 calls. The full day total for August 4th, 2020 was a whopping 160,000 calls, and 120,000 of them had already come in by 3:30 in the afternoon when the worst of the storm began to pass. To get even more granular, 311 received approximately 45,000 calls between noon and 3:30 p.m. That's a rate of more than 12,000 calls per hour or 200 calls per minute for 3.5 hours. Using wait times as an important metric, the results for August 4th were quite good, and I'd venture to say extraordinary given the volume. Callers who followed the prompts to get to the express lane for storm-related calls experienced wait times that were under 5 minutes for the vast majority of the day, with max average wait time of 7 minutes during the 1 hour period between 1 and 2 p.m. Importantly, storm-related volume did not affect wait times for COVID-related calls. New Yorkers using the standard express lane for things like food deliveries or to get connected to a primary care provider experienced de minimis wait times all day. And Spanish-speaking callers who followed the Spanish prompts saw no wait times at all. Callers who did not follow any of these express lane prompts saw an average 12-minute wait time at 2 p.m., which quickly dropped off to 5 minutes at 4 p.m. through the rest of the day. Now let's talk about two things that didn't go according to plan on the day of the storm. First, some callers who submitted complaints about trees or branches did not get an initial confirmation email that their service request was made. However, these requests did make it to the Parks Department, and the New Yorkers who submitted them did receive email updates on the status of their service requests. To be perfectly clear, all that was missing was the initial confirmation email, but I will be the first to say that that is unacceptable. We have already put in a fix to the 311 system to ensure that confirmation emails for tree and branch related service requests are sent every time. Second, I understand the Parks Department site for reporting down trees or branches was hit with a high volume in a short amount of time. This meant that when 311 call takers used the Parks website on the day of the storm to input these service requests, intermittently, they received a notice that they should retry at a later time. In certain cases, 311 asked callers to call back or attempt the service request entry themselves through the website. As I'll explain in a moment, these instances did not ultimately prevent 311 and the Parks Department from taking tree or branch service requests related to the storm, either on the day of the storm or thereafter. We made the Parks Department aware that 311 call takers were experiencing this issue, and the Parks Department notified us that they had a fix in place by August 7th. Because I am a proponent of belt and suspenders, we are also building this form into the 311 portal itself. To put the effects of this issue in perspective, I want to make sure it's clear that 311 took the majority of storm-related service requests about downed trees and branches on the day of the storm. over 15,000 of them. To put this volume in context, through August 9th, which represents a 4-day post-storm grace period, 311 received a total of 20,520 tree-related service requests, deduped to represent unique locations. Now I'd like to take a moment to address Intro 1775. It is very clear to me that the general feedback I've received from the council highlights some of the most pressing issues associated with 311. And geolocation services, which is the subject of your legislation, is certainly chief among them. I look forward to discussing this with you and continuing to work to improve the 311 system. I hope this presentation has given you a good sense of the 911 system, the 911 system's performance during Tropical Storm Isaias, and what I like to call 311 2.0, a service that doesn't just respond to New Yorkers' needs, but anticipates them, that is agile and proactive and striving to be more so every day. Thank you so much.
Good morning, Chair Holden and Chair Borelli and members of the council. I'm Deputy Chief Richard Napolitano, the commanding officer of the Communications Division for the New York City Police Department. I'm joined today by the Managing Attorney of the Legislative Affairs Unit, Michael Clark. On behalf of Police Commissioner Dermot Shea, I wish to thank the council for the opportunity to comment on this important matter. As commanding officer of the Communication Division at the NYPD, I oversee all of the New York City's 911 centers and dispatching operations. Our dedicated police communications technicians, commonly known as PCTs, 911 operators, and police dispatchers, are thoroughly trained on how to handle each and every one of the approximately 9 million 911 calls we receive each year with efficiency, precision, and compassion. PCTs are often the unsung heroes of the law enforcement community, fielding thousands of calls a day from individuals of all walks of life who are often in the midst of the worst moments of their life. PCTs are given 13 weeks of initial training, with dispatchers receiving an additional 7 weeks of training. PCTs also routinely receive in-service trainings. Training modules include use of the CAD system, new code expansions, understanding routes, and updates on revised directives system-wide. Upon answering a call, the PCT determines the nature of the emergency and routes it to the proper dispatcher, either NYPD, fire department, or EMS, who then determines the appropriate responders for the incident and dispatches them to the scene. As Tropical Storm Isaias bore down on New York City, we began to make plans to ensure that our call centers were properly staffed. Our experience with the worst storm since Hurricane Sandy indicated that increasing our staffing by 33% over a typical day tour would manage an expected potential increase in call volume. On the day of the storm, I was monitoring the call volume as it progressed. At around 11:30 a.m., we noticed the 911 calls were spiking. In addition to the extra staff that we already had in place, we began taking people off of other assignments to staff the stations. Between 12:30 and 1 p.m., we received 3,247 calls. By comparison, on Tuesday, August 6, 2019, we received 673 calls between 12:30 and 1. The call volume continued to increase, peaking at 4,724 between 1:30 and 2. During this time, we doubled our typical staffing, connected training stations to the system so that we had all available workstations staffed by PCTs taking phone calls. This is significant because no amount of additional staff could have reduced call intake times, since every possible call intake station, including our terminals used for training new PCTs, were activated and being used to assist New Yorkers seeking emergency assistance. All told, we received over 25,000 calls between noon and 4, which is more than we received during an average 24-hour period. We received more than 4 times as many calls than we did on average during the same time period in the August in August of 2019. This was by far the highest call volume we have received since Hurricane Sandy hit New York City in 2012. While the 911 system did not fail during the storm, the high call volume did strain the system. Of the 25,000 calls we received during this period, there was a delay in our ability to answer the significantly elevated influx of calls. Call volume slowly declined after the peak, though remaining above normal through the early evening. However, the increased staffing, utilization of all available call take stations, and slowly decreasing call volume prevented delays after 4:30 p.m. The NYPD takes the solemn duty seriously to ensure a prompt and professional response to anyone and everyone contacting our emergency call center seeking assistance. We understand that every second counts in an emergency, and therefore we do everything in our power to ensure that plans and protocols exist and are timely executed to address elevated call volume. This includes staying aware of potential heightened volume due to approaching weather events and staging our resources accordingly and quickly activating those resources as was done during this event. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to these critical issues, and we look forward to answering any questions you may have.
Josh, is that all who's testifying? Okay. I have a question just on the outset because I thought I heard two different things. Inspector Napolitano, you had said that there were some internal delays with the system when the volume started to peak. If what I got, by the way, your backgrounds are great. You guys should win awards for Zoom backgrounds today. You both look fantastic. But the Commissioner Tisch said that there was some carrier problems that led to the volume. Was the problems that we saw, in other words, the delays that the customers or complainants faced, was that a result of a carrier problem? Or was that a result of a staffing or volume on our side, on the city side of things? Maybe I heard wrong, but I just want to, that was the only thing that stood out to me. Josh, if you could unmute them.
Sorry, I just got unmuted. Let me clarify. Two separate issues. First, what I was referring to about the carrier problems. New Yorkers across the 5 boroughs reported issues with their cell phones generally working and cell phone service. That's what I was talking about when I referenced a carrier problem. So if I was in an area where a cell phone tower lost power, my personal phone may have lost service, may have had degraded service, which would affect all of my calls, okay? Including if I was calling 911. Separately, what Chief Napolitano was addressing before regarding queuing and wait times, those are two distinct issues.
Okay. Can you just go over again how many call takers might be working from home, what equipment they have, who's providing that, and what percentage of the total call center workforce is home at any given time?
Sure. Are you referencing 311 or 911 or both?
Both.
Okay, so why don't I start with 311 and then I can turn it over to Chief Napolitano who can address 911. So for 311, the main call takers that we have are our CCRs. I think our allotted head count is 265 of them. We're actually overstaffed now. We're above allotted head count. We're at 271. All of those CCRs access the 311 dynamic system physically from within the 311 call center. So they don't work at home. When COVID hit in March and really in April when I took over. The volume was so high, people were on hold with 311 for unacceptably long amounts of time because of the volume. And so what we did is we brought in surge staffing. And those surge staffers, some of them worked from city facilities, but others were able to work at home. Now, those, I would say the breakout would probably be somewhere like 600 working from home and 300, let's say, working from, the 311 call center or other call centers that we stood up. To clarify, the systems that the call takers, the surge staffers working at home are able to access are different than the system that the CCRs can access in the 311 call center itself. So while the surge staffers were enormously helpful in terms of offloading some of the volume on the CCRs, they don't have the tools or the ability to take the full complement of 311 calls that the CCRs take from within the call center, which is why we created those express lanes. So if you were calling about a COVID related issue, the surge staffers had access through their portal to take those types of calls. And we set up the same type of thing in advance of the storm, the express lane for downed trees and branches, so that the surge staffers working from home would be able to take those. Now I'll let Napolitano respond to the question on 911.
We have approximately 1,350 call takers and dispatchers assigned to the communications division. On the day of the storm and leading up to the storm, we had numerous meetings taking a look at staffing based on past storms. And we added an additional 33% of our call takers to the morning. That was with an account that we had a huge backup, a resource pool of administrative workers that are technically doing training, roll call, payroll, taping records. But because it's a Tuesday, between Monday and Friday, most of the administrative staff work, we knew we had that pool. If this storm was occurring on a weekend, I would have had to double my staffing on the weekend. So leading up to it, we had that pool ready. I came in and I spoke with all of the unit heads, and I had them on standby with their headsets available. So when this storm started increasing around 11:30, we had extra staffing added. Then when it hit us even harder at approximately 12 and after 12, we had all available staffing. We had training canceled. We even had 24 additional people come from home. What happened was we filled up all available call taking positions, as I said in my testimony. And we even added the training classroom, like I mentioned, and we staffed that as well.
Thank you. Just so on August 4th, Bill Neidhart, the press secretary to the mayor, he had tweeted out that 311, and I quote, had already received 110,000 calls as of 3 p.m. that day. The open data set for 311, though, shows there are 22,724 service requests and 18,250 call inquiries from that day. Do either of you, I guess I direct this more towards Commissioner Tisch, do you know how this 110,000 call number was obtained? And should that alarm us since there are only 40,000 or so service requests or inquiries that were made? In other words, were there 60,000 calls to 311 that went unanswered?
No, thank you very much for that question and the opportunity to clarify. Bill's tweet was correct, and the numbers that I laid out in my testimony, 160,000 calls for the day. Those are also correct. There is a difference between the number of calls that we take at 311 and the number of service requests or inquiries. So to start, not every call results in a service request or an inquiry. So for example, I said that some people called that at the beginning of the 311 welcome message, we put up the numbers for Con Ed and PSE&G. So people calling about power related issues probably didn't wait on the phone to speak to an agent. They got the number for Con Ed, PSE&G, and they moved on and called those companies. So that's the first thing. Second thing is, at the bottom of Open Data, we tried our hardest to put in place a clear disclaimer, which said that the numbers reflected in Open Data don't reflect the total counts for service requests and inquiries based on what we had to do to surge our staffing during COVID. So the numbers in Open Data reflect the numbers of service requests and inquiries taken by the CCRs who work in the 311 call center. They do not account for the service requests or the informationals handled by our surge staffers who are working from home. This is because in order to accommodate the surge staffers, we have them using what's called our portal, which is basically the 311 website. So if I call 311 and I choose an express lane and I get a surge staffer working from home, that surge staffer can input my tree or branch related requests, can send it over to the parks department, just like the CCRs can. But the system, because it's done through the portal rather than the Dynamics website, the system doesn't record that is a service request or a knowledge article handled by the 311 call center. It looks on Open Data like it was done through the website.
Thank you. All right, I just want to switch gears before I hand it over to Councilmember Holden. 911 system-wide, were people texting the 911 system, and if so, how many during the storm?
Yes, they did, Council Member. The texting went up pretty significantly during the height of the storm. So we had 61 text during the second platoon. Typically we have about 10 to 15. And then on the third platoon that starts at 3 p.m. till 11, we had 36. So we had approximately 100 text during this day, which is approximately double of our typical text average.
And were there any issues given the spike in volume? Sorry, were there any issues with the text to 911 given the volume increase?
There were some delays at the height of the storm from around 1 o'clock to 3 o'clock. We did sustain delays.
And just sticking
we had
with
24 delays during that time. So people that were texting were also waiting to get through.
What is the normal response time for texting?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
What is the normal response time for texting to 911? Not response time to when a unit is on scene, but when someone texts, Grandpa's having a heart attack. What is the typical time for the person to receive a text response?
The typical basically response time where we respond back to them with some type of text is almost immediate, several seconds. Usually text volume is very low, handling only maybe 2.5 hours. Like I said, at 1:30 to 2 o'clock, we handled 17. That's approximately 8 times greater than average. So usually it's immediate. As soon as the text comes in, our text operators are available because like I said, it's not being used very frequently. So the text operator is just there waiting for a call to drop in. At this time, we staffed up for text as well, where we went to average agents for the half hour. We had 11. Usually we have like 3 or 4. However, the texts take longer to handle, and it does tie up our operators. So there was delays as well. Like I said, there was actually 24 delays during that time.
So just to clarify, there are 24 delays on text. Can you just say for the record how many delays on calls there were for 911?
Yes, during the 24-hour period, we had 7,177 delays. And a delay
And what was
is
the
any
average
call that
time?
takes over 30 seconds to have an operator answer that call.
And do we know what the average time of the delay was?
We don't have an average because the system does not do the average, but we have the longest held. And unfortunately, the longest held call for voice was a slightly over 3.5 minutes.
Okay. And do you know what kind of case that was for the 3.5 minutes?
No, the system doesn't explain which call it was. It just gives a half-hour breakdown.
Okay. In your experience, did any of the people of the 24 or so you mentioned that were delayed from texting, did they not get an immediate text and then call? Were people doing that?
Yeah, some of the texts, they did wait. They waited several minutes for a response. Most of the text that day was for trees down, wires down. They did receive a response. However, it was delayed, very similar to the voice calls.
Yeah. So just, I want to go back to that. We know the longest was 3.5 minutes. The shortest delayed was 30 seconds because that's even where we start counting delayed. So I find it troubling that we can't get an average because I think there's a big difference between 30 seconds and 3.5 minutes. I think that is life or death. That's not 15, 20 seconds. That's life or death in a real life situation, especially when, correct me if I'm wrong, this is even before a dispatcher identifies the nature of the call. You know, if it's a 911 call about a downed tree, yeah, 3.5 minutes, it might not be a problem. But if it's 3.5 minutes while grandpa's having a heart attack, that would certainly have a problem. When we implement Next Gen 911, do we anticipate the same type of problems? In other words, are we going to build this fancy system for Next Gen 911 and then still be limited by the number of staff that could handle a volume of calls in any given time?
We still would have similar problems as we did on the day of Storm Isaias. The problem is the huge spike in call volume makes it difficult to handle from a number of positions available as well as a number of operators that are available. And I'll just expand upon that. This was the highest call volume, I know I already said this in my testimony, since Hurricane Sandy. On Hurricane Sandy, we went over 10 times the average call volume. We have 2 call centers that were fully staffed and manned. For Hurricane Sandy, we would have needed 10 call centers, and we would have needed 10 times the amount of personnel. It's very difficult to keep up with that. For Tropical Storm Isaias, we would have needed 5 call centers as well as 5 times the amount of staffing. And what I believe is needed, if in my opinion, what we need is we need to educate the public to not dial 911 unless it's a life-threatening emergency. Many of these calls were trees down. Unfortunately, that does make somebody's day. That is an emergency to most people when a tree falls on their car, clips their car, or lands on their fence. However, in a storm like this, when there's thousands and thousands of trees down, they shouldn't be dialing 911. If we could teach the public to dial 311 and 311 will route it to the correct agency and the correct agency will respond and eventually take care of the trees, I believe that's what's really needed because these type of storms are so huge in size that we can't build enough call centers to handle this type of volume.
So I definitely agree with you that we should be pressuring the public to dial 311, but let's stay with that though on the city's end. How quick can a 911 dispatcher offload a case of down tree to 311 via an operator or digitally?
We did do that, and there was a lot of coordination between myself and Commissioner Tisch and DeWitt and 311. And we did do that as quickly as possible on the day of the storm. It's, if I just had to, maybe about 35 seconds, we have to obtain the information, know that the emergency is strictly just a down tree and that nobody's in danger. Once we obtain those facts, such as asking, is anybody trapped in the car? If it landed in a car, is anybody in danger? If it fell on wires, are the wires sparking? Are they live wires? As soon as we're able to obtain that information, we transfer it to 311.
And my final question: has there ever been any? Yeah, has there ever been any thought, or maybe OEM? And I regret they're not here to answer this, but has there ever been any thought similar to the way during storms we empower agency managers, perhaps from DOT or DEP or something, to manage some of the shelters? Has there ever been thought to train some city workers in some sort of a reserve corps of 911 or 311 dispatchers that could be deployed just in short bursts in another storm?
That would be very, very difficult. I'll just do my best to explain why. The system requires 13 weeks of training. They learn codes. We make changes quite often to the system, which requires updates and additional training every time we make some type of, whether it's code change or system change. So unless they're handling calls on a regular basis, their training, just say we trained them 6 months ago. If they don't use that skill, they're going to get rusty. They're not going to be efficient. And also the changes would make their response or their handling calls probably not sufficient to handle an emergency.
Would there be a value in retaining some retirees that could perhaps more easily adapt to whatever changes have come across? Again, you're talking about
retirees. We have considered that. It gets complicated though with the pay. But let me explain what we have done that I believe is helpful for COVID. Due to the large number of our operators that contracted it, we trained over 60 of our police officers that were prior police communications technicians and have since moved on to the police department and came and become sworn police officers. So we have those police officers as a backup pool. We have them reporting to our call center every month though, to continue handling calls. So that's the complication where they have to keep that skill sharp and they have to repeatedly. So with members of the NYPD, we're able to have them come and report to the call center, and we schedule that every month. So with other agencies, it would be very difficult, if not impractical.
Okay, I will turn it over to Chair Holden, and I'm glad there was a good reason why we couldn't do that, because it seems like such an obvious solution, but as you pointed out, there certainly seems to be a real reason. Chair Holden.
Thank you, Chair Borelli. I have a few questions, and by the way, thank you, Commissioner and Chief, for your testimony and valuable information that we've heard this morning. I just want to talk about storm prep for a few minutes. Now, you mentioned, of course, we were overloaded. In preparation for the storm, did you have did the call takers come to some kind of meeting, whether it's virtual or otherwise, to talk about how we handle the volume? How do we shift during the storm some of the calls? How to handle some of the calls in a quick manner? Was that meeting of all the call takers, did that occur prior to the storm?
So I'll start by answering, I think there's an echo. I'll start by answering for 311. So yes, there was a lot of pre-storm preparation. And it really started 36 hours ahead of when the storm hit, when it became very clear that it was heading directly for us. In terms of the training of the call takers, what we do is we put out job aids, which is something that they're used to. So anytime there's a content change, it happens fairly frequently at 311, we update our content all the time. But whenever there's an important change to processing or content, we put out job aids that all of the call takers review prior to coming on shift. So I believe the day of the storm, there was a job aid about how we were going to be handling the 311 calls about down trees and branches. There was also additional communications to all the call takers throughout the day. For example, when we were preparing to handle more volume being transferred to us from 911 after I spoke with Chief Napolitano, that communication, that's an example of a real-time communication that would go out to all of the call takers.
Okay. Now, did you, in preparation from the storm, did you increase utilization of automated telephone messages, possibly sort of robocalls, or short message services, or social media, email alerts, and the city's website to disseminate information and to reduce non-critical information requests? Because that we got a lot of that obviously during a storm, you get everything. And some of the calls shouldn't have been placed to 911 and so forth, or 311. But going forward, could we utilize more of that in the system, like preparation for the storm? Did we do that this time, by the way?
So yes, I saw a number of tweets from various administration accounts and social media postings to try to get volume off of 911 and send it over to 311. There was a lot of messaging around that. Certainly once the chief and I spoke at around 11:30 that day, and it became clear that the volume on 911 was building to the point of like developing a queue. And as the chief said before, I believe public messaging about when to call 911 is probably the most important thing we can do going forward to take some of the strain off of 911 in these major weather events.
Yeah, because I think educating the public, for instance, if a tree falls in front of my house and it's blocking the street, people have to know, is that a 911 or is it a 311? If it hits the wires, obviously it's more dangerous. Electrical wires, that sounds like a 911. But we need to break it down. We need to, and it can go through the council offices also, that we could educate our constituents, because there is that gray area. And if we could sort of cut down on the number of calls, educate people, and a robocall. So you get a call and you say, it tells people what to do in the event of that this happens. Obviously, most of the complaints are down trees, especially in my district or in Queens County. So we need, and what I got some complaints that the 311 operator or the 911 operator didn't know what to do in that case. Or we even had a few callers saying that they stopped taking those down tree calls on 911. So educating the public, using social media, for instance, using anything we can to get the word out prior, and how to prep. And I know a lot of people don't listen to it, but I think we learn lessons from these storms over and over again. We learned that a tropical storm can knock us out a lot more sometimes than a hurricane, depending on how it hits. We learned the number of calls that couldn't be placed, or people got recordings. And I just want to get to that in a second. But preparation, if we could all be included in storm preparation, so we can help with your obviously the plight of 311 and 911 during this time. I think reaching out to us might be the best way to go here.
Thank you.
And so maybe we can have a task force set up next time with the council involved, and going forward to handle some of these calls, Commissioner. You might, we might be able to educate everybody together. Now, let me just talk about the recordings that you mentioned, Commissioner, that people got in some cases. Was that on the 911 system that somebody got a recording? Was that you called it Express Lane? Was that where the recordings came in?
So two different types of recordings. For 311, when you call 311, you reach our IVR. It's the way we direct calls to the appropriate call taker. So press 1 if you're calling about coronavirus. Press 2 if you're calling about down trees and branches. When I talk about express lanes, it's in the context of 311, and it's those. Press 1 for COVID-related calls. Press 2 for down trees and branches. And what we do is we staff those express routes with hundreds of call takers, depending on the volume that we're anticipating. So on the day of the storm, if you press 2, I think it was actually press 3. If you press 3 for down tree or branch related to the storm, there were 600 call takers waiting to take those types of calls. For 911, the recording that your constituent is reporting, I believe, is different. It's not express lane. So when you call 911, when they're taking delays, so when the calls are beginning to queue, there's not a call taker available to take the call immediately. The caller hears a recording, which expresses to the caller that they are waiting for, they've reached 911, and they are waiting for the next available agent or police communications technician to handle the call.
All right. Let me go back to the tree complaints that you mentioned earlier with the Parks Department. You mentioned that the problem that you had is people didn't get a confirmation in making that complaint. What was the problem with that, and what caused that, and how are you going to change that moving forward?
Sure. There was two types of problems that I referenced in my testimony. The first was that when callers called 311 and reached a surge staffer, that surge staffer entered the service request through the portal, and the person making the call or making the complaint didn't receive an initial email confirmation that their service request was accepted or taken by the 311 system. To be clear, 100% of those service requests were taken and accepted. It's just that the member of the public didn't get the confirmation email. I said in my testimony, and I'll reiterate, it's unacceptable. We found the part of the code in the 311 system where that error occurred, and that has been fully addressed. The second issue that we faced with 311 related to the down trees and branches that day was the Parks Department site that accepts service requests from either the public or surge 311 call takers became intermittently unavailable based on the very high volume in a very short amount of time. The Parks Department, we notified the Parks Department, and they have already addressed that issue as well, so that their site is going to respond better under the unanticipated volume that we had that day. What I said in my testimony is because I believe in belt and suspenders, I'm also building that down tree branches form into the portal itself so that when that's done, 311 surge call takers won't have to go and put extra volume on the park's website. They will be able to do it through the 311 portal itself.
Okay, I just want my final question. I have some more questions, but I'll turn it back to Chair Borelli after this. There are still problems associated with the location of the service requests on the mobile app. The interface is not user-friendly and makes it difficult to enter the location unless the user knows the exact address. And that's a problem we faced for a while. We live in an era where technology is advancing at a great rate, obviously. But so what makes it so challenging to improve the location services on the app?
It is challenging, and I'll go through the reasons why it's so challenging, but it is definitely something I am looking forward to rolling up my sleeves and working on with you. Frankly, when we spoke, I don't know, 7 months ago about this is something I would have hoped we would have addressed already. With COVID, the work that we've done on the 311 system over the past 5 months has been largely keeping up with different service offerings that all of the agencies are putting out there. 311 is the place to call for every city service. So for the past 5 months, we've just been working really hard to keep up with all of those new offerings. But now that is hopefully quieting down, we look forward to working with you on improving location services on the app and on the website. I don't want to bore you too much with the technical detail, but I'll just explain that 311 integrates with a number of agency systems. 311 takes the request and sends it to whatever agency needs to respond. Each of those systems has their own geolocation service. So what we really need to do, this is broader than 311, it's fixing it for 311, but then also at the same time, upgrading all of those systems that 311 touches at all of the agencies to have the same geolocation service. Because when I take a request through the app, that address needs to go into another system. So if it's parks, for example, down trees or branches, it's got to go into the park system and they need to be able to accept that address. We can talk at length about this. I'd love to give you a comprehensive briefing on it, but it is definitely something that I agree needs to be improved. It will make a dent in terms of enhancing the customer experience of 311, which is exactly what we're looking to do.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner. Back to you, Chair Borelli.
Thank you. And before I turn it over to Councilmember Brannan, I'd like to acknowledge the presence of Council Members Koo, Ulrich, and I saw Councilmember Lander, who appeared to be outdoors. Councilmember Brannan for questions.
Thank you, chairs. I wanted to ask a couple of questions about the staffing levels for 911 and 311. What are the total numbers there for staffing?
I'll start with 311, and then Chief Napolitano will take the question on 911. For 311, I believe we have an authorized head count of 265 CCRs. We overstaffed, so we're above our allocated staffing at this very moment. We're at 271. And Chief, on 911?
Our head count, we have approximately 1,350 911 operators.
Okay. And how many calls, what's the average call per day that 311, if I'm an operator at 311 or an operator at 911, how many calls a day am I taking?
Do you want to go, Chief?
To unmute me. Okay. Okay, the average operator can handle 10 calls a half hour, so approximately 20. So if you multiply that by 6 for the hours that they're actually working, approximately 120 calls during an 8-hour period, an 8-hour work period.
But most of these folks are working longer than 8 hours, right?
During an emergency such as this, yes, there would be a significant amount of overtime. For example, on the day of the storm, we held all of the operators from the day tour onto the 4 to 12 into the afternoon shift.
And for 311, okay, thank you, Chief. For 311, our call takers are handling on a normal day now between 50 and 70,000 calls per day. That's different than the number of calls we take to 311 because many of the calls that we take can be handled by our voice recording service.
And is there, what is the, for especially for 911 operators, is there any support or consideration given for, mental health and breaks and that kind of stuff with the stress that they're under?
Absolutely. The breaks, they get breaks every 2 hours at the minimum. They get several breaks throughout the day. They have a lunch break. They have breaks split up between the lunchtime as well, at the minimum 2. So just on a typical day tour, they would get a break. You could say a 40-minute break before lunch, and then they would get an hour lunch as well as a 20-minute break after lunch. And they would also have personals where if they needed a bathroom break or if they had any issues. If they've handled a very difficult call, we encourage them to actually step away and get some time to themselves. We have a quiet room in the Bronx. We also have a unit that's sole purpose is to just help them get through difficult calls and difficult days. Employee assistance unit.
Do you think, I mean, if money was not a consideration, are you comfortable with these staffing levels?
Yes, I am.
So you don't think we don't need more?
No.
And what about for 311?
I took over 311 in the middle of April when volume was, through the roof. So we really had to rely a lot on the surge staffing that we had, both in terms of the NYPD cadets who stepped in big for us, taking 311 calls, and some outside vendors that we hired to take the calls. But the volume that we've been receiving for the past 6 months has not been normal at all. It's been much greater than, the volume we took, for example, a year ago.
So just to reiterate, what Chair Holden brought up about how some of the calls to 911 were going to voicemail during the storm. Was that just, I guess, pardon the pun, was that just a perfect storm? I mean, what exactly made that happen?
I want to just clarify. No calls went to voicemail. What happens is,
well, it didn't go to voicemail. No one answered.
Well, when there are more calls coming into the 911 system than there are call takers to take them, the calls get queued up. And so that's what happened at 911, starting around 11:30 in the morning. There were more callers than there were call takers to handle those calls. So those calls get handled by an agent in the order that they come in.
And that was the first time that's ever happened?
No, certainly not. The chief explained that we consider delays at 911 to be any wait over 30 seconds. And so that's definitely not the first time that 911 has taken delays. Chief, would you like to expand on that?
Sure. Anytime, as Commissioner Tisch explained, it takes over 30 seconds, it's a delay. It's something we do our best to avoid. However, major events, not just major storms, but a major explosion, a very noticeable fire, these type of events cause an influx of 911 calls that we do not have enough operators. When something like that does occur, we did what we did with Tropical Storm Isaias as far as pulling any administrative people off of their administrative duties and have them report to the call taking floor. However, this event was just, a very, like I've said before, it was the biggest event since Hurricane Sandy. Something like this is very difficult to have enough operators available.
And so, but were we seeing delays like this? And we saw delays like this during Hurricane Sandy as well? I don't remember.
Of course.
Yeah. I'm trying. It's got to allow me. Okay. Just muted me. The host, can you speak? Because he muted me.
We can hear you.
Okay. Hurricane Sandy, the delays were substantially worse. We didn't actually have as many operators logged in as we did during Tropical Storm Isaias. Like I said, we were able to prepare, and individuals were also able to report to work. In Hurricane Sandy, quite a large percentage of our operators weren't able to report to work.
Something you said earlier, as far as folks calling 911. I mean, I certainly was raised thinking that you only call 911, in a serious emergency. But over the past few years, certainly I've heard from other folks that say you should call 911 because that's why the operators are there. You're not wasting their time. If it's not an emergency, they'll transfer you. Are we at a situation where we're sort of changing that messaging? Or, I mean, because I was certainly raised like you don't call 911 unless your life is in immediate danger. But then and it was like, you don't want to make a false call because you'd get in trouble if you made a false call, basically. This is when we were kids, right? But definitely over the past 20 years or so, there's been messaging that, well, you should call 911 if you're in danger or if you're concerned about something, and then the operator can then decide or determine or triage if that's worthy of a 911 call. I don't think that there's people who, I mean, this is something that we would have to work on, but I don't think that there's anyone who calls 311 or thinks about calling 311 if there's an emergency of any kind. And unfortunately, I don't think there's many people that equate 311 with any urgency of any kind. And that's part of the problem, I think. I understand we don't want people calling 911 just because a large branch fell down, but they know that when they call 311, basically the canned response is, we'll check it out within 14 days. And, it's basically nothing ever happens. So I think there's a perception issue there as far as the two services.
It's possible that individuals believe that by calling 911 improperly, that their situation would be corrected quicker. That's not the case. And as you were raised, I would hope to educate the public to not call 911 in times like this. A tree falling down in front of your house, even if it fell on your car, it's very unfortunate. However, it's not a 911 emergency. If a tree falls down on a one-way smaller street, that's not an emergency either. If a tree falls down on the Long Island Expressway due to the need for that highway to be open, that would be a 911 call. So this does need some education for the community, and if more people thought of 911 as you do, council member, we probably would have less problems in a major storm.
But I mean, there's also, you correct me if I'm wrong, I mean, I know PD also is very focused on data. And a lot of times they want, calling 911 in order to make a case, where the first thing they'll think of, like I know with some of my local precincts, if I get complaints about issues or concerns about issues, the first thing they'll do is take a look to see if there were any 911 calls made. And a lot of times there aren't. Like, it could be an issue that everyone on the block is aware of, but for whatever reason, they haven't been calling 911. And if there are no calls logged in for that location, it's harder to get them to believe that there's an issue here because they're so focused on that data. So I think that's sort of the problem, because you don't want people just calling 911 for anything, but they don't feel any urgency of calling 311. So there's sort of a gray area there. And because NYPD puts such a focus on that, it's a problem, because you want people to call to make those complaints, but you also don't want them calling if it's not an emergency. So, and calling the old rotary phone at the police precinct is, something for the 1950s,
I understand their concern, and it makes perfect sense for criminal matters, for crimes in progress, or for just say a drug condition, a drug dealer is on the corner. It would make sense to call 911, document this, and it would strengthen their case that they've tried numerous times to address this. However, for non-emergencies, such as trees down or a blocked driveway, just to cover some other 311, they should call 311, and that would be documented, and they would also, if they had to go to court or they had a problem with their neighbor. From what I understand, yes, they do keep track of that, and would show that they're trying to address the condition. So in some cases, it makes sense for crime and emergencies. 911 will be documented. For non-threatening emergencies, non-emergencies, 311 would be better.
Okay, and okay, yeah, and I think I think that's part of the concern, I guess, because then we need the information to sort of back up what the neighbors are saying, and they have to have a way that they can actually log this stuff and make it, I guess, build a case around it, and that's certainly part of the thinking there. My last question, I guess, for as far as social media and Twitter and stuff is concerned with 311, I see sometimes it's constituents of mine who might tweet at me and at 311 or at any agency, and then 311 will pick it up. But there's always an extra step. Is there a way that it's always basically, okay, I see the photo of the issue that needs to be addressed by 311. It's staring right at me, and here's the address. But now sort of the 311 bot or whoever's managing the social media then says, okay, but now can you call or click on this link to fill this thing out? And it's just an extra step. Like, why can't it just be that if someone is raising an issue to 311 on social media, that it's picked up and someone's there to enter it in, instead of actually asking the resident to actually then do that work? It just seems like a needless extra step.
Hi, Council Member. Joe Morris Rowe from 311. I'm going to field this question on behalf of Commissioner Tisch. So thank you for the feedback. And first off, there are 311 employees who actually do field that those questions through Twitter. And they actually offer a couple of options. Sometimes information is needed. A picture is great, but there are some coordinates that may be needed, such as an address or an intersection. And the way the model works is we can give the customer the link so then they can go ahead and submit it directly. Or we offer to DM the customer, direct message the customer to be able to obtain that additional information, be it an address or maybe just another step in the description process. But the goal is to try to make it as simple as possible for the customer. And as you noted, other agencies will quote unquote loop 311 in so we can go through that mechanism to produce the end result, which is a service request to the agency and a documented item for the customer.
Okay. Yeah, I just want to make it as easy as possible. I mean, it's, most people don't even take the time, they just see an issue and they go, whatever, right? So, but the fact that someone's willing to actually take the time to bring it to our attention, I want to make it as easy as possible for them to actually have it addressed. And having an extra step is just another sort of obstacle for a resident, I appreciate it. Yeah, look, most importantly, I think we don't think a lot about the 911 operators who are really our first responders. They're the first in line. So, hearing that you certainly take into account their mental health is very, very important, because I don't think enough of us think about what these folks go through and what they have to take home to their families every day, every night, and some of the calls that they take. The stress level must be just, unimaginable. So I appreciate that you guys are sensitive to that, and thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. I'd like to recognize Council Member Deutsch for questions.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Chief, for all the great work and hard work you're both doing to rectify the issue with 311 and 911. My question is, actually, when one calls 311 about a tree down, who determines the time that the time frame that the agency must respond by?
So I believe you're referring to our SLA.
Yeah.
And the SLAs are set by the responding agencies.
So if, we all know that the NYPD was defunded, Parks Department was defunded by more than, I believe, $85 million. DSS was defunded by like $1.1 billion, and sanitation was defunded by more than $100 million. So how does the backlog affect the system and user activity, where one may continuously check the status on their complaint online, or they would make repeated calls on the same issue by calling 311? Because I have a constituent that called multiple times for like a tree branches that were laying in the street after the storm, and he continuously calls 311 because on the 311 system it keeps on checking that the case was closed. And also my second question is, do you have any stats of how many repeated calls there are to 311 on the same specific issue?
So I'll take the first question now, and I'm going to use it as an opportunity to plug a new feature that we actually recently put into the 311 system, which was an idea raised to me by Chair Holden. Several months ago, he told me that his constituents didn't get confirmation emails or updates about their 311 service requests through email, that they only got those confirmations and updates if they had an account with 311. So about 2 months ago, we implemented a change to the 311 system, whereby anyone who puts a service request in through 311, whether by phone, the website, or the app, if they give us an email address, they receive both confirmation emails as well as updates on the status of their service request. Now, obviously, those updates are generated by the responding agency going into the system and updating the ticket, but those now are available to 100% of 311 customers who give us an email address. And on your second question about repeat callers, I'm going to have to try to pull that data for you and follow up with you on it. What I can say is, in terms of general call volume or general wait times at 311, they're really de minimis. I mean, we've added so much surge staffing, the idea being make 311 really responsive, or the 311 call center really responsive to New Yorkers' needs. So in a normal day now, if you call 311, you most likely won't wait on hold at all, which is something that we're really proud of, and we've worked really hard to make the 311 service more customer friendly.
Thank you. I don't see any other hands, so I will turn it back to Councilmember Holden for additional questions.
Thank you, Chair Borelli. Commissioner Tisch, we had the opportunity to review the New York City 311 task order provided by DoIT last year. According to the task order, there were no provisions for patches or updates to the NYC 311 app in the contract. At our last hearing, or at a hearing on January 21st, 2020, you responded that you will let us know about patching provisions. However, as of this date, we have yet to receive an answer to the following questions. Are patching mechanisms addressed in the current IBM contract with New York City 311?
I apologize for not following up with you on that issue, but I can say, yes, that has been corrected.
Well, I know you were busy, so I'm not, you were busy with a pandemic, so I understand that.
Understanding, yes. We have corrected all of the issues that we identified, and many of which you pointed out. And of course, patching and security of the 311 system are our highest priority.
Great. Okay. I'll just give this to Chief Napolitano. Chief, I understand that in the text to 911, there were the operators, call takers handled both. Is that true? That they handle text and regular calls?
Yes, our operators are trained to handle both. However, we have it split where voice operators for the day, they just handle voice calls. We have them actually logged in to handle solely voice calls, the same as text operators. Once they log in, they're logged in as text operators. However, they're trained, obviously, to handle both.
But obviously, certain people are faster at texting, right? I mean, they would probably, they would most likely be better if they were just doing that. If they're really fast in texting, that they'd be just doing that. And I think, especially during an emergency, that probably should be implemented. Do you do that?
Chair Holden, as you know, I used to oversee 911 call taking operations at the NYPD. I worked very closely with Chief Napolitano, and I welcome and encourage you to take a trip over to the 911 call center. You have never seen faster typing in your life. That's what these agents do all day, every day, whether it's taking calls or texts. They're constantly inputting information into the 911 system, and they're amazing at it. So I think everyone there is much faster texter typer than most.
Right. So, but that's a talent, and I think it should, we should exploit that. It's especially not put them on calls because their expertise is obviously texting much faster than the average person. But let me
Council member,
Yeah.
just to expand on that, we do have individuals that are very talented that work more often in the text aisle. So the individuals that are very talented at that skill and appreciate it and enjoy it, I should say, we assign more often.
Right. Okay. So it makes sense. But let me just ask another question, then I'll turn it back to Chair Borelli. We understand next generation 911 is set to be rolled out in the next few years. Do any of you foresee a next generation 911 running into a similar capacity issue that we faced recently?
You want to take that?
Toss up.
Okay, I'm back. I can see a similar situation happening. That's why I know I'm repeating myself, but we really need the public to understand that these type of natural disasters, that 911 should not be used for trees down, wires down. And again, you'd have to go all the way back to Sandy 8 years ago, but it was similar where hopefully we're able to, learn a lot from this and also teach the community not to dial 911. Otherwise, it could happen.
And just one more little question about the upload of 311 pictures, application photos, and video. Do we have an update on that, Commissioner? When we might see an expansion of that?
Yes, based on your feedback, we have added that feature for the vast majority of the new service request types that we've put in place. And based on the list that you gave us of the service requests that you think it would be most relevant for, the legacy service requests you think it would be most relevant for, we're planning a major 311 release that's going to include that. Don't want to bore you, but just want to mention one complexity, which is my problem to solve, but just so you understand. Adding it to the 311 system is easy, right? I could basically flip a button and add pictures to every service request type. The issue falls in terms of getting it to the agencies themselves. Not all agencies use the 311 system. The NYPD does, for example, so it's really easy to get them pictures. But other agencies that don't use the 311 dynamic system, but that take the data from the 311 dynamic system and bring it into an in-house system, those systems need to be able to accept pictures as well. It's not useful to the member of the public if 311 can get the picture. They really need the agency that's actioning the service request to get the picture too. So that's what we're rolling up our sleeves and working on right now. So
we still have the problem of the agency cooperating and actually looking at the photos, because we've had that in the past. So
I characterize it as a problem of them cooperating. It's something that we are working with them on. And I think, in this day and age that everyone understands the importance and usefulness of pictures. So it's something that, as the person who's overseeing 311 now, that I am eager to work with other city agencies to roll out at your suggestion.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner. Thanks, Chair Borelli.
Thank you, and I'd like to recognize Council Member Lander for questions.
Thanks very much, Chair, and thank you, Commissioner in Chief, for all your time with us today and all these good answers. I just and I apologize, I missed a chunk earlier, but I just want to follow up on the question that Chair Holden started to ask about moving forward to next gen 911. I know in the big hearing that we had on sort of, priorities, there are a lot of them, and I understand COVID has obviously interrupted a lot of them. I think it's great that the text to 911 came online even amidst COVID. So props to you for getting that done. Would have been easy to miss that. You testified in that last hearing about some of the both benefits and then, the long-term nature of moving beyond that to next gen 911. And I would just love a little status update. I could see that being a thing of like, there is so much work to do, given all the other things you've outlined in this hearing, that honestly, that is just going to wait until like the next mayoral administration, or no, that's really underway in the back rooms and there's a lot going on to get there. And I just wonder if you could give us an update of where those things are.
Thank you for that question. During March, April, May, June, July, we were really slammed as the IT agency. It seemed like every agency in the city wanted to bring on a new service online, and we had really important work to help agencies do that. We were very busy, as you can imagine, but it was really important to me not to let the general work of the agency slip too much, or frankly, slip it all on the really important programs. So as you mentioned, we continued forward with our plan to release text to 911 on time in June. Same thing went for next gen. I had committed to the council on my last next gen update that we would be registering all of the next gen contracts by June this year, and that was done. We decommissioned NiceWin. So again, despite the huge influx of work, we didn't stop plowing forward on the major programs that DoIT has been working on, and the commitments that we've made. Certainly certain things have slipped, and that has to happen, but the big ones are plowing forward.
Sorry, there's some construction, city-sponsored construction work downstairs, so I tried to mute just so you wouldn't hear that background noise, but then I didn't have the power to unmute myself. I guess I heard the chief talk about the ways in which even the next gen 911 system obviously will, be staffed by people, and so could have some of the same challenges of staffing that we saw during the storm. I guess I wonder whether it will have benefits as well. Hopefully part of the idea of, moving to an all digital system is, I don't know whether it means that more things can be more quickly moved and transferred. Will there be some benefits to having next gen 911 in terms of search capacity, or response times, or some of the kinds of things that people would be, ordinarily associate with a big upgrade? Or is this really just bringing the technology into the 21st century, integrating the voice and text and digital platforms?
As far as addressing a surge in call volume, it would not help much at a day such as Tropical Storm Isaias, because again, it's a personnel. It's just having the individuals sitting down, being able to handle 911 calls. There's many benefits from next gen 911, such as location, obtaining a perfect location basically off the GPS of their phone. That perhaps can help.
But that should save some time, right? Because then the caller doesn't.
If we're able to see their location immediately, we will not spend as much time trying to obtain it. So in a way, it can possibly help a search.
Okay. Thank you very much. Appreciate your work. Appreciate this hearing.
Thank you. And I see no one else has raised their hands for questions. So with that, we will dismiss this panel. And I want to thank both of you and the other folks out there very much for this. Josh has told me, our counsel has told me, there are 2 people signed up to testify. So Josh, will you ask them to identify themselves and sort that out?
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, everyone. We're now turning to public testimony. I'd like to remind everyone that unlike in our typical council hearing, we will be calling on individuals one by one to testify. Council members who have questions for particular panelists should use the raise hand function in Zoom, and I will call on you after the panelist has completed their testimony. For panelists, once your name is called, a member of our staff will unmute you and you may begin delivering testimony. So as Councilmember Borelli mentioned, we have 2 individuals who have signed up to testify. They are currently, they should be unmuted, and if you are, there's a caller 1 and a caller 2 who have not provided us with a specific phone number. So if you could identify yourself and then feel free to begin discussing. I guess caller 1 to start. Now we only have 1 caller. Is there an individual who just signed off as well? So it appears that both of those individuals who signed up to testify have left the hearing. So Chair Borelli, I guess we could go back to you and wrap things up.
Thank you very, very much. Councilmember Holden, do you have any closing remarks?
No, I want to thank both the commissioner and the chief. By the way, the chief and I go way back when he was the captain XO in the precinct, our local precinct. It was nice to see him, and you're looking well. And I want to thank you both for your testimony. And I'm looking forward to that tour, Commissioner. I want to see how fast these people can text, because maybe like Superman or something. But it sounds like it's an amazing job that they're doing that all day. But thank you both, and thank you, Chair Borelli. I think it was a great hearing. We've learned a lot, and I think we have our preparation certainly for the next storm, which might be coming, might be down in the tropics now. That we have to prepare. And I think the idea of doing social media and alerting the council offices that we can educate constituents on obviously what we talked about before about what's a 311 call, what's a 911 call, and how can we help obviously the system, help everyone do their jobs better, and just focus on city services. There was the breakdown we mentioned, especially we couldn't get answers to people's talking about down trees. I know Commissioner Tisch will certainly address that, and it won't happen again. But I want to thank you both for your testimony, and thank you, Chair Borelli.
Thank you, everyone, for participating. And with that, this will close out today's hearing.